All right, welcome. So in this video, we're going to walk through ChatGPT. So you're here because you probably have heard about it. You maybe even be using it at this point. And you want to learn more about what it is and why it's so popular these days. So ChatGPT is written by a company called OpenAI. And what they have done is they have developed, or they specialize in writing AI models. So think of models as just kind of rules, if you will, to produce some sort of output without necessarily having human intervention. It can automatically produce some type of output. There are many different types of models that OpenAI has, and what they've done is they've taken two of them and put a front end on top of that called ChatGPT. And what it allows you to do is allows you to kind of have a conversational kind of interaction with the OpenAI model. And based on that interaction and that context of what you're asking it, it can produce results. Okay, so it does have the ability to understand context. It can provide relevant responses. And in a lot of cases in which many people are using it for is it can generate creative content, which is really kind of what I think most people go to use it for, because it's kind of does allow you to save yourself a lot of time. It is free, though they do have a pay version that allows you to access and select between the models. Okay, so I'm going to be showing you the ChatGPT Plus version that I'm paying for. And at the time of this recording, it's $20 a month. But the free version is just as good. You just won't be able to select the newer model. And the newer model simply just means that it's got better reasoning. In some cases, it can be faster. In some cases, it can be slower as far as generating the data. I have found it to be slower than 3.5 when generating a response, but it does produce a better response. So that's kind of why I've chosen to use that one. There are competitors. Bing Chat and Bard are two other competitors to ChatGPT. They do kind of the same idea, but ChatGPT does seem to be the most well-known out there today. Two important points that I'd like to make about ChatGPT and any of these models that we're talking about is that they technically don't really understand what you're typing in. So the results that you see they may seem magical in terms of what they produce, but there's nothing magical about it. Essentially, it was designed to be able to predict based on what it sees what the output should be. So it's really a predictive model, and based on the context of what it sees, it can predict, hey, this is probably what should be produced based on what I see and what I know. All of the data that it knows is actually from a snapshot in time, although they do have ways of updating the model to improve them. As a matter of fact, I've seen even with ChatGPT 3.5, the model has improved, and they have newer versions of that model, and they've produced a much better output. But there's nothing magical. It doesn't know, it doesn't understand, it's not self-aware. It really does predict based on what it sees and the context of what it knows and how the language is in terms of what the output should be. Second thing is that it's not always accurate. It can have hallucinations. That's kind of the term that you'll see used a lot in terms of sometimes what it produces. So you really have to be careful about what you see and what comes out of it to make sure that it's accurate. So you may produce something and it looks and feels right, but you read it and it's like completely wrong. And sometimes that might be due to the fact that what it sees may be different today than what it knew back in September of 2021, which is when it was originally pulled together in terms of when the training data was kind of assembled for it. To get started, what you're going to do is you're going to navigate to openai.com, and from there you're going to look for a ChatGPT option, and then you'll see underneath there a Try ChatGPT option. So once you click that link, it will send you to a page that looks like this. It's either going to ask you to log in, and if you already have credentials, you can go ahead and log in. If you don't have credentials yet, you can go ahead and sign up for free, and that will get you into the login page. And then from there you log in, and then from there we'll see the interface. So when you log in, you are going to see a page that looks similar to what you see here. Now, my option is, again, I'm using ChatGPT Plus, so I have the option to choose from the different models. If you are using the free version, you just won't have this option at the top here. All right, so here is the main page. You're going to see on the left-hand side your chats, and this is where you can see the history of all your chats that you've had in the past, and they'll stay here automatically. Every time you create a new chat and you start typing in a conversation, you'll see a pop up here. At the very bottom is where you can get to some of the settings or log off. You can set custom constructions, which we'll talk about at a future module. But for right now, the main thing here is under settings. Definitely want to take a look at settings and make sure you kind of see what's there. They add new capabilities every once in a while. For example, recently I looked and you can actually turn off the chat history, which is kind of nice because I guess some folks don't want to save that history. And for if you have privacy issues or concerns about having these chats stick around longer than needed, you can just untoggle that and then you won't have access to your chat history. But it is convenient to have that there because as you create more and more conversations, you'll want to be able to go back to the older ones. So unless you have a compelling reason not to, go ahead and just leave that on. And you can look at some of these other options here, but for the most part, go ahead and just confirm that you have all your settings the way you want them to be. And then here is where we're going to do a bulk of the work. So in the main page you see here is where we're going to do our conversations. So every time you start, you are going to start off with some conversation. Now, the key here is that these conversations within ChatGPT are conversational in terms of that you're actually talking to the AI engine every time you enter data. Now, the data we enter, you'll hear it referred to as a prompt. So we are going to type in a message, but in reality, what we refer to, if you look out in the industry and you hear lots of people talk about prompt engineering and prompts, it's really talking about these messages that you're going to type in here. Okay, so we're going to type in prompts, and based on what these prompts are, the AI engine is going to respond. Again, it doesn't really truly understand what we're asking it. It looks at the patterns that it knows and the rules and the patterns that it knows to come back with a response that looks pretty good. So to give you an idea of kind of what a typical response might look like, if I were to come down here and say something such as, help me create a blog post about digital marketing, and hit enter. Even though I spelled digital wrong, it actually did figure out what I meant by that. So it is pretty scary in terms of how accurate it can be. So you can kind of see really quick, it came back with a response. Now I'm using the plus version, as I mentioned, so my responses are coming back fairly fast. And that's one of the advantages of paying for the paid version, is that you do actually get a better response time in terms of what it produces. What it actually produces, the content will be the same, but it'll happen faster. So that's one of the things you're gonna, is your decision point of whether or not to go with the plus version, the free version. That's something to consider if you're waiting around. It's just because you're kind of at the bottom of the queue, because obviously they're going to give the pay customers a slightly better performance. So here is my post here. It came back with table of contents, and it gave me kind of an outline of how I can do that. Now, the other thing too is that these responses will be somewhat random. So every time I run this, for example, if I regenerate this, I might get a different response. And in fact, I did get a different response this time. So there's a randomness to what you see, what comes back. So it's not always going to be exactly the same. So it's not predictable. And that's key, because a lot of times what you see, it may look and feel right, but if you read through it, the contents may be off. So it's very important, regardless of what you get back from the engine, even though it looks really good, you must read through it thoroughly to make sure it's accurate. Because again, it may be inaccurate for a number of reasons. Number one, it might be dated, so it doesn't have up-to-date information in the pure sense when you're looking at it this way, although there are plugins and different ways to get more accurate real-time data. So that's one reason. The second thing is that it is just a prediction. So sometimes the information that it gives you back may not just be accurate. It just may be looking at inaccurate data. But in our case, I asked it a simple question and I got back a response. Now, what's nice about this is that these conversations have context. Everything I type in here is maintained, meaning that as I put more and more questions in this conversation, the conversation data will stay and it'll be part of what's sent back to the engine. For example, if I were to say something like this one here, let's say I want to get more information on this particular topic, SEO and keywords. If I just said the word for, give me more information about number 4, like this, right? So I didn't tell it anything about SEO and keywords, but because ChatGPT does keep the context of what's being asked of it in this conversation, it knew that I was talking about number 4, SEO, SEO and keywords, right? So it knew that that's what I meant. So therefore, it came back with a response specific to that specific topic. So this is really powerful, but there are some limitations. Now, one limitation is that these conversations are somewhat limited in terms of how far back in time it goes. For example, I can continuously ask questions and fill out more information and get more details from the engine inside this conversation. And at some point, it won't remember what I originally asked for. Now, what you're getting back may still be good, but you might find it as you go further and further in a single conversation, it kind of gets off a little bit. So again, you really need to be reading what's coming back. And if for some reason it's not correct, just rephrase the question again. Say, hey, by the way, we're talking about how to create a blog post, right? So just remind it what's going on and just bring it back into reality in terms of what you're asking it for. So this is what is referred to as context. The more data that you provide in the conversation, the more information you tell the engine, the more accurate the response is going to be. So this is really powerful, but it is, again, limited in terms of, as I mentioned, there's kind of a window of how far back it goes. So you just have to keep that in mind as you're reading the conversations, that you might have to just do some extra work there to get it back on track if it goes off the rails. You also, as referring to that, a lot of what comes back isn't accurate, as I mentioned earlier. We refer to that as hallucinations. So sometimes what you see may not be accurate, and you have to just keep that, take everything you get with a grain of salt in terms of what comes back from the engine. It looks great, feels great, but it may not be accurate, okay? So the second thing is that what I can do is I can continue this conversation, but you can kind of see it's now stored up here. So that means that I can actually create another conversation that's completely new from scratch and start off with a brand new set of questions for the engine. And as I create more and more chats, it's automatically going to add in, of course, unless I turn off the history feature, it's going to automatically add those chats in here. So for example, I can change this one and say, create me a short story about the moon landing. And you can kind of see it'll come back with some type of small story about the moon landing, and it's not bad. It's not bad. It looks pretty good, but again, you got to read it, and you can kind of see now that conversation is down here. So I can toggle between the earlier conversation or the one that I just done, and as I click around, you'll kind of see it switch to that between those two conversations, and you can have as many of these conversations up here as you need. So regarding prompting, now as prompt engineering goes, it is a growing field. You'll see it used a lot. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to post in the description of this video a link that gives you access to various prompts that you can use to get started. But when you create your prompts, it's important to give it the context. For example, let's talk about kind of a nice use case here where, let's say that I want to use ChatGPT to help me generate an email. So here I have a prompt that I created that says how I want it to act. So that's part of it, is you provide this context and saying how you want the engine to behave, and it'll respond accordingly with the response. So here I'm asking it to act as a polite employee and telling it that I wanted to write an email that I can send back to a customer that sent a complaint email about their delayed order. And I want them to tell them the product will be shipped next week, sorry, and offer them a 10% off their next order using a coupon code, 10 off, right, within the checkout. So that's my prompt, and if I hit this, you're going to see that I'm going to get back a really nice email. And it's actually, now, could I have done this myself? Obviously, yes, I could have written this email, but by using ChatGPT, I can use the time saving, and all I need to do really, again, is read it, make sure it's accurate, and I can cut and paste this into an email editor and continually refine it. Again, you have to make sure it's accurate whenever you're looking at it, but it's not bad. It gave me information here. It gave me a placeholder for the customer name, and it's a really nice email. Personally reaching out, it's very polite. It has my coupon code here. It's giving me 10% off, and it's not a bad way for me to be able to generate these emails. Now, again, I can give it context. So there are some things, for example, since I'm using ChatGPT and I'm using it in a conversation, I can continue to ask it more questions or tell it more details. So here I'm going to say, you know what, the customer name is John Smith. And then if I hit John Smith, then it will then take that, and now it has replaced the customer placeholder with John Smith. So I can continue to add more details into this email, refine it how I want it to look, and I can then take this and use it in my email package. So that's kind of a really nice, easy to use time saver that you can use to help you with kind of like real tasks. And you can think about lots of other types of tasks in a similar vein within your day-to-day work, obviously. What's interesting is the context is important, right? So let's go back here. And I told it to act as a polite employee, but this time I'm going to cut and paste this, and I'm going to change it. And I'm going to say, instead of acting as a polite employee, I want it to act as a snarky employee. So I want to see kind of how this is. And let's see what happens this time if I ask it to act as a snarky employee. All right, there it is. Find you well. These better spirits than your last message implied. So you can kind of see it's a little bit more snarky in terms of response. It's not quite as polite. Now brace yourself for shocking revelation order scheduled next week. So it's definitely a different tone. Okay, so prompting, there's a lot that goes into creating good prompts. So you have to make sure your prompts are have the context of how you want it to behave. So you have to give it that information. You also have to make sure you give it what your goal is. Okay, not in my case, the goal here is to create an email, and the role that I want the engine to play is I want it to act as a snarky employee, and you give it other detail, and obviously you can continue to refine that. But this is an easy way that you can use ChatGPT to help you with day-to-day operations. Now, another thing you can use it for is you can use it to help you in your business creation. So here's a slightly different prompt. And what I'm asking you to do here is I want it to act as an expert on starting a business. I want you to help me determine what type of online business to start. I want you to ask me as many questions as needed to help me figure that out. And I want you to ask me the questions one at a time until you have everything to give your recommendations. I want it to ask me the questions one at a time. So if I hit enter on this, you'll see that it's going to stop and it's going to ask me for all the questions. So it's going to ask me one question at a time, and I can continue to answer these questions, and eventually it will come back with a response. So let's kind of see how this works. All right, so let's see how this worked. So we've got, here's the first prompt. So what I did is I just kept answering the questions. It kept asking me different questions. What type of your primary interests and passions? I put programming. What programming languages or technology you most comfortable with? I put Python on web development. And you can kind of see as each question comes down, I'm able to provide the context. And then eventually, if I scroll down here, I get a response. And so the engine itself was creating that conversation and asking me the questions that eventually came up with a solution at the very end. Thank you for providing the details based on your interest. It came up with that solution for me starting an online business, right? So you can use ChatGPT and you can craft prompts like this and in similar fashions and have ChatGPT help you do different things. And even you can have ChatGPT help you learn ChatGPT. It's kind of crazy what the possibilities are with this engine. So I hope you found this useful. So now you should have a good understanding of what ChatGPT is, how to get started, and some of the different ways you can use ChatGPT in your day-to-day.